And a number of revelations have been made, not only on Joy FM, but also on Joy News and the other partner stations on the multimedia platform. But more so are the revelations that, well, a year on since we had going under, Capital Bank as well as UT, we've had a number of banks, including Unibank and the others, that have now, as we know it, been consolidated into one. Just think about perhaps the non-consolidation of a banking industry. But more so are the concerns being raised, not only about how perhaps the expressions and the speculations and the analysis of the media could have a dent on the participation of local people in having an interest in Ghanaian-owned banks. But should that be a concern? How do we improve that? Because we know on the other side, the Bank of Ghana has got its regulations, and inherent in those regulations are the need for the best practices. And we know we've had the Basel Conventions, we've had an upgrade on all that, and the need for consolidated banking. And Kojo, that is why we have somebody who is not new to our studio. Nana Otue Champon comes here all the time, and we're grateful to have him.
Yes, indeed. I consider Nana an old friend now. We've known each other a while. Yeah. So nice to see you, Nana. Thank you very much. We know you will help us totally understand the big picture when it comes to what is befalling the banking sector. But first, before we get into it, as a result of all that has happened, the Institute of Chartered Accountants has released a statement regarding the collapse of some of these banks. I want to read it quickly. It says, the Council of the Institute of Chartered Accountants, Ghana, has noted with great concern the current developments in the banking industry, with particular reference to the collapse of 7 banks. The questions many people, accountants and non-accountants, are asking are, 1, why the external auditors of these banks couldn't pick up the going concern difficulty signals during the audit process. 2, does it amount to inefficiency or negligence? 3, is there any disciplinary action the Institute can apply to these auditing firms? 4, the Council of the Institute wishes to assure the general public that the Institute has a formalized procedure to handle complaints against its members. The Professional Standards and Ethics Committee of the Institute, in line with its mandate, has initiated the necessary inquiries if an appropriate action will be taken if there is merit to the complaint. The Council appreciates the public and will do everything possible to safeguard public interest. This was issued by the Council of the Chartered Accountants, Institute of Chartered Accountants, Ghana. So these are the companies, the auditing firms that have been found to have been responsible for auditing the specific banks that have just collapsed. So for Beige Bank, the auditing firm is called Morrison. And then for UT and Sovereign Bank, it's Ernst & Young, now known as EY. They were the auditors for UT Bank and for Sovereign Bank. For Construction Bank, their auditors were J. Mills Lamte & Co. For Unibank and Royal Bank, it was Deloitte and Touche. Big firms here. And for Capital Bank, it was PKF, Chartered Accountants and Business Advisors. Okay, so you can see that there are global firms involved here. And I think this is a great place to start. Help us understand, based on the information Bank of Ghana has put out, is there any way in this physical universe we occupy that these auditors could not have known what was happening?
Well, it's a yes and a no, in the sense that primarily is the management who the shareholders have devolved powers to, who are responsible for the preparation of financial statements. Then the auditors come in to give assurance that the assertions that have been made in the statements are true and fair. Now, if we digress a bit to the UK, for the past 6 to 8 months, there has been quite a big furore about auditors and the firms they've audited which have collapsed. The typical case was an audit conducted by one of the big four. And when you say the big four, these are PwC, Pricewaterhouse, KPMG, Deloitte, and EY.
Yeah.
Now, they audited a company, British Home Stores, BAC.
DHS.
Then within 6 days of passing a clean audit report, the company was sold for £1. So they came in and said, how could you possibly have given a going concern certificate for the company? So they launched an investigation. There was also another big company which within, I think, 3 to 4 months, it collapsed. So all this culminated in them setting up a special investigative committee. And in one of the cases, KPMG was really sanctioned in terms of financial sanction. And to date, I think if between the big four, they've paid in excess of 15 million pounds in the UK. So the move that has been initiated by the ICAG, that's the Institute of Chartered Accountants Ghana, is in the right direction. And if their investigation turns out to establish that, then it will be good not only for the profession, but for the whole economy. So I think we should give them the opportunity to investigate. The list that you gave, only 2 are amongst the big 4. The rest are not so big, but it doesn't matter. They are all occupied by qualified professional accountants. So the work should be to a standard that is expected of an auditor. But you know, as I said earlier, the primary responsibility is on the management in the preparation of financial statement. But the auditors also give the assurance to the shareholders that yes, we have conducted and found that everything was okay. Yes.
Now, help us understand, and I think we can take certain specific examples here and look at the Bank of Ghana's role. You know, because talking about these auditors brings us to the other body that ought to have their eyes on what is happening, and that's the Bank of Ghana. So we take a company like Unibank, where we are now being told that about 75% of the total value of their assets was basically looted from this bank and handed out in loans that were either not on the books or, you know, given to shareholders and related parties without going through the right processes and so forth. Basically given out to friends and family. How can that happen without the Bank of Ghana knowing?
Well, I think on Monday, Joy Breakfast did have a very long discussion with the current head of the BSD, that is the Banking Supervision Department. Now, he did admit that yes, there may have been some regulatory forbearance, which in layman's terms means that some untoward thing may have happened. And the governor has also been on record, at least when he spoke on the 23rd of July, that nobody is going to be spared the due process. And if their investigation establishes that any member of staff, present or past, were complicit or didn't do what they were supposed to have done properly, then the due process will follow. So I think on that basis, there's not much gainsaying in, you know, going over and over this. Yes, as human institutions, there will be some infractions of frailties. Once they're identified, we accept and move on. So right now, my main concern is what can we do? And to me, it's 2 things. A, we have to educate the public about the going-ons. And then, especially for our local banks, try to let people know that all is not lost. Now we are left with 12 plus 1 local banks. That is 12 old ones plus the new one, consolidated bank. Yes. So what can be done for these firms? They are all not in the same boat, different levels. Some are as big, if not even bigger than the foreign, banks. I'm not being discriminatory here. They are all Ghanaian banks because they are in Ghana. But somehow out there we try to differentiate between those which have majority shareholder
being Ghanaian,
being non-Ghanaian, and then those being Ghanaian.
So
I think that is
but ultimately, it's good that you mentioned the local banks too, but let's bring them the conversation to the table, because we know that after the going under of some of these banks, there could be some local investors in the future who would want to invest in any way. So basically, let's say Kojo Yankson is interested, has some money in his vault at home, wants to establish a bank. What usually would be the regulation, the requirement, and the benchmark you have to meet? And then after it's established, what should be the role of the Bank of Ghana in supervision? What will be the steps, etc.?
Well, to start with, the Ghana being a free market economy means that there are no barriers to setting up a business, so including banks. So if you've got the requisite capital, then you go through. There are rules that they set as to how to meet those rules to set up, the thing. But what has come out of this is that if your bank was established before 2014, you needed to have physical cash or equivalent, which can be certified to the tune of 60 million.
Right.
Now, after 2014, it's 120 million. Now, the BOG press statement on 1st of August identified that there were one or two banks which didn't meet that criteria, that 120, especially those which were formed after 2014.
Capital Bank was an example.
They needed 120 million before they could get a license. But from the governor's report, it appeared that some of them got their license without getting, that some of the terms he used was non-existent suspicious capital.
What did that mean?
Well, it meant that in a specific case, in this example,
of Capital Bank.
No, I think it's one other bank. I think it's Sovereign.
Okay.
That they made the application, showed that this is the money, but later, when they wanted to see the money wasn't there. So it's similar to, when we went to the UK to study and you needed to renew your visa. You ask a friend, please give me some money to put in my account, and then they will give you the money. You go and renew your visa, and you give the money back to them. So there was no necessary, it wasn't necessary to go back and say, you showed £10,000. Where is the £10,000? Say 2 months later. But in banking, if you show 120 million, then throughout your operations,
it should be
you have to see the 120 million. Exactly. You see, but from the governor's report, it appears they showed 120 million, but later they disappeared. So,
and to show the connection, am I correct in saying that the Bank of Ghana says that when it disappeared, it was traced to another bank?
We did trace some of them, yes.
Back to Capital Bank.
The unofficial report.
Right.
I haven't seen any official report apart from a few pages that you guys have been able to access. But I'm referring to the governor's own statement, which was issued on the 1st of August. He said, yes, in one or two cases, the capital was said to be there. They got the certificate, but later we couldn't find the capital. But if you brought the capital, it should be there all the time. Not that you bring it, you get a license, and then the capital disappears. Because banking is such a specialized institution in that you are using other people's money. When you look at the capital of a bank, typically, and the last survey from Bank of Ghana showed that for the 100% capital a bank has, the owner's contribution is 13%, and other people's money is 87%.
Wow.
You see? So that's why Bank of Ghana is very particular. They always have the interests of the depositors at heart. So even though you could say that, yes, you brought the 13% to set up the company or the bank, you have also got depositors' money, and that depositors' money is at the core of regulation, that the Bank of Ghana has to protect the interests of these depositors. Because, God forbid, if the bank collapses, you are losing only 13%, so call it in 100, 13 cedis. What about the 87 cedis that other people have brought into the bank? So it is very important. So with the respect to the capital, that is what it is. Yeah.
So you've mentioned the importance of us focusing on local banks. All the 7 that have collapsed were local banks.
Unfortunately.
And can this be a coincidence, or does this mean something? Is there something that is preventing Nigerian banks or British banks from also being so blatant in looting their own vaults that local banks don't seem to have?
Okay. Yes. From the report of the governor, or I would say the central bank, from UT through Capital, through Unibank and the rest, one of the main problems they identified was governance, corporate governance. Because if corporate governance is entrenched, then some of the things that happened wouldn't have happened, because corporate governance clearly specifies what each person should do and what the duties of the committees that support the board and so on. So if you take cases where people dip their hands in the cookie jar, that's because there was an absence of corporate governance. So Bank of Ghana has seen this, and they've come out with a very comprehensive set of documents called the Corporate Governance Directives. So some of these local banks, although they are majority owned by Ghanaians, when you go through their corporate governance structure, it's at par with some of these top British banks that you refer to. You see, so that is the importance, that those who are in the list of, say, 12 plus 1, some of them, their corporate governance is so top-notch that they shouldn't be ignored at all, and we should bring them up to the fore.
But we still can't walk away from the fact that the 7 that did the wrong thing are all Ghanaian banks.
Yes.
So I suppose the thing that keeps recurring in my mind is these corporate governance guidelines that the Bank of Ghana has just come out with didn't exist before.
No.
However, none of the banks that took advantage of the absence were foreign.
Well,
okay.
Because,
So in the absence of someone telling us that this is how your corporate governance should be, somehow foreign banks still got it right.
That is because their parent companies, which are foreign, were subject to those corporate governance in their jurisdictions.
Yes.
If you take the British banks, you couldn't do away without. Nigeria, they've
gone through the crisis already, so they have the remedy.
Yeah. So now we are doing catching up, and that's why I feel that going forward, if these governance directives are entrenched, then we can see that there's a line in the sky.
So it's good that now we have these directives.
Yes.
And it's good that we're looking at the going forward. But if, let's say, we have in the reports that in Capital Banfred there were webs of transactions involving insider parties, meaning that shareholders, directors were just playing drafts or dummy with what they have in as their capitalization or whatever.
They call it financial engineering.
So you guys call it financial engineering. Now, at what point with these new regulations, the way the Bank of Ghana is, could there be an opportunity in the future in which we can't have such these abuses? 2, how can we make sure that the investments or those who are the shareholders would also not be a party to some of these things in the future?
Yeah. Now, the answer is fairly and squarely within the provisions of the Corporate Governance Directive. If you,
of the Bank of Ghana.
Of the Bank
the
of,
Bank of Ghana that has shown that
has
before its banking supervisory department has not been effective.
And they've changed. That is the what you are getting from the Bank of Ghana. On Saturday, news file, the second deputy governor intervened and said, look, we have structures in place now to deal with these things that shouldn't have happened. So the corporate governance directive is correcting a wrong. That yes, we are sorry this happened. Because for instance, some of these things that happened, if their corporate governance gave them an opportunity to whistleblow, because you are a member of staff, you are in charge of treasury, and you saw that monies were being taken, outside the rules.
Without due recourse to the regulations.
You are scared that your job is at risk, and therefore, if you whistleblow and they get to know, they'll sack you. Now, one of the banks that, a local bank, has got such a good system that they have a whistleblowing line which is managed by one of the big four. You don't know who you are speaking to. They will not also ask you who you are.
Say this
Just
again.
give them.
You are saying that the local bank,
one of the local
banks,
yes,
has a whistleblowing line.
Yes.
But at the end of that line, it is managed by one of the top four.
Exactly.
Which is foreign.
Yes. No, one of the big four accounting firms
of
the world.
One of the big four.
Which are
one of the big four, Deloitte and all,
Right.
PwC,
Yes.
KPMG.
So if you have information that you think is contributing to the bad nature of the bank, or is going to lead the bank into, it gives you the opportunity to tell them, and they will take action.
So they encourage it, whistleblowing.
Yes, they encourage it. For instance, the Barclays in UK has a similar system. And recently, one of the employees whistleblew. Then the MD wanted to identify the person who whistleblew. You know what they did? They fined him £1 million for attempting to identify the whistleblower. So the system that this bank has, I mean, if you go to, I can give an example, the office of Fidelity. Yesterday I was there, and
is Fidelity the local bank you're talking about?
It's one of the, no, it's a different bank. But when I went to pay my water bill, you know where you pay your water bill. Where do you pay your water bill?
Yes, in the washroom.
Then I was so impressed. I saw a notice there saying, if you are not happy with anything, anonymously,
call this.
Call this number. I don't know where the S is.
And you are saying such notices and structures give credence to whistleblowing.
Exactly. Okay. And such things would have stopped some of these, unfortunate happenings that we are seeing coming out.
I wonder though,
banks.
I mean, look at what happened at Unibank, for example. How would a customer ever know that this is going on and then go and blow the whistle?
No, staff.
Yeah. Right.
So you are head of treasury, and then
you know that this is going on.
This is going on, because you are scared of losing your job. If you say it, they said that's the door. Walk out.
So let me ask this: we are talking about local banks and having to bring them up to a certain standard, which I think is a good thing. But as a customer, when I'm trying to decide which bank to go to, whether it's a local bank or not doesn't tend to come up in my consideration.
No.
I rather think, I want this product, I want this service, which bank can give it to me, then I go there. And sometimes the thing I want can be something as superficial as I want a Visa card that looks nice, and this bank has one, so I'm going there. But people have different reasons. It doesn't tend to be that I want to be in a local bank. But Nana, tell us why it is important for us to promote local banks as Ghanaians, as citizens, after what has happened.
I think it has come up over and over again that when it comes to helping the local people, it appears you get the best from the local banks. because there are certain...
And if you're talking about help, what help do you mean? You mean when they need access
to finance, to set up a business, they are able to. Unfortunately...
Is it not because the processes for acquisition are laxed?
Exactly. Some of them lax it. But
That's
some
not
of them,
good reason for promoting local banks then.
But some of them too are, as top-notch, comparable to. And that's why I said that even some of them, when BOG in terms of regulation, classify them as non-local because their corporate governance structures are so good, you see. So I think at the end of the day, the deployment of this new corporate governance directive, by and large, will go some long way to correct some of these evils.
Now, I asked before he comes in, we're told that the banks, especially those that have gone under, apparently had gotten what you bankers call liquidity support.
Yeah.
Liquidity support means that they were cushioned. You go and get some money, or whatever it is. But at what point do you qualify for liquidity support?
Okay.
If you get liquidity support, what do you need to use that money for?
Well, okay.
What don't you need to use that money for?
Okay. In layman's terms, liquidity support is an overdraft. An overdraft because there's a mismatch between your income and your expenditure, or the maturity days of your investment. So it comes in as overdraft. And overdraft is a loan. So every loan that is given by anybody, even if I take a loan from Kojo, you can tell me, look, this one, you said you want a loan to buy a machine for your business. Make sure you use it to buy a machine. Don't go and buy a Mercedes because you think that will make you look nice, or don't go and marry 4 more wives, that sort of thing. So joking apart, when a loan such as a liquidity support is given, the regulator or the person, institution giving that loan will have the do's and don'ts.
And in this case, we have the Bank of Ghana.
Yes. So Bank of Ghana giving liquidity support, for instance, will tell you that do not lend that money to anybody. And in the case of Unibank...
And Capital Bank.
No. First, in the case of Unibank, the Bank of Ghana's report, when they were putting them in administration, they say that they use the liquidity support to pay off on lend, which it was not allowed. So at least we are able to identify one of the don'ts that you should not do or put the liquidity support to. In the case of Capital, they've identified that, from the unofficial report you are referring to.
And they gave them 610 million, we're told.
Unibank had 2.2 billion.
Yes, we know that.
Yes, so whatever they gave to them, they were specifically to help them overcome the short-term liquidity challenges that they had, that you are not supposed to use it to pay off.
But in this instance, for the two, they flouted them.
Exactly. And that is what the Bank of Ghana report said.
We have chairmen also being mentioned here. Let's say you have a bank in Ghana.
I was going to say, do you mind if we actually state what Capital Bank, for example, and UT Bank did?
It won't be bad.
Because we've mentioned Unibank. So we understand that with the 610 million that Capital Bank got, Atu Essien, William Atu Essien, who was the founder of the bank, used 80 million Ghana cedis of it to set up other businesses. And they've listed those businesses here: Ocean Spring Mineral Water, Brightling, or is it Brightling Services, Jinyame Realty, Accent Financial Services, Aish Life Assurance Limited, Capital and More Company Limited, Capital Africa Group, First Capital Plus LLC in Zimbabwe, Jinyame Resources LLC also in Zimbabwe, Bill Mine LLC in Zimbabwe, and Aish South Africa. That's what he used 80 million out of the 610 million Ghana cedis liquidity support to do. Then 27.5 million Ghana cedis of it was used by a board member for business promotion. So you have a liquidity shortfall. You need an overdraft, you know, to meet your liquidity requirements. You take it and you take 27.5 million of it to promote the business. Okay. 23.9 million of it was transferred to a company called IFS, which has since come out to say that Capital Bank owed them money.
So they just collected their money.
Yes, this was just their money being paid back. 65 million Ghana cedis went to Nordia Capital. 130 million Ghana cedis went to All Time Capital. And these two amounts together, 65 plus 130, making up 195 million Ghana cedis, was then transferred to set up Sovereign Bank, which money then we know subsequently at a later date disappeared. Okay, so that's what was done for Capital Bank. Quickly for UT Bank, when they got liquidity support, they used it for, let's see, UT Bank and Capital Bank. UT, according to documents available, used its liquidity support of 860 million Ghana cedis from the central bank to pay off maturing obligations and international credit lines which had crystallized. Is that wrong?
Well, as I said, I don't know the conditions that are set by the lender.
Okay.
And here in the lender is again
Bank of Ghana.
Yes.
Yeah. So they are the ones giving the liquidity support.
Really.
And then
you think the Bank of Ghana will tell them should give on lend to?
No, on lend then you know, yes, because you want an overdraft to bail you out normally like your working capital, and that is out of your working capital. So I think their rules will be that you cannot do that.
Right.
Now, for all these approvals to have been made, it means that the managers would have to go to the board. And then the board is headed by chairs, shareholders, and all that. Usually, what would be the role of the board and the chair?
Well, the backstops with the board for every entity, including banks. And therefore, issues such as that will go to the board and chaired by somebody, and they have to make sure that the right things are being done. Even before it goes to the board, under the new corporate governance directives, there are at least 3 committees that are formed. So it goes through the committee, and then the committee will report to the board. So the role of the board is very clear, that the backstops with them, and they have to ensure that the right things are done.
So, for example, with Capital Bank, liquidity support of 610 million being distributed in this manner, 80 million of it being used by the founder to set up other businesses, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 businesses. And then some of it being sent to set up another bank, some of it being used to promote the business. These decisions would have to be approved by a board, am I correct?
Yeah.
So that the board members and their chairman decided to do these things.
That is what the unofficial report is saying when the official report comes out to confirm. Because in the case of Unibank, I would say the official report is what the governor gave out at the press conference when they put Unibank into administration, that they did A, B, and C that were against the rules, that if you are giving liquidity support, you should not use it to pay off certain debt or use it to invest, because that's a capital expenditure. And overdraft is not used for capital expenditure.
Okay. So you're saying that the approval by the board and its chair is illegal?
Depends on the regulations that they have. You know, if the lender, i.e. the Bank of Ghana, gave you X amount and said you should use it for ABC and you use it for XYZ, then
and you are saying that usually the Bank of Ghana will not tell you go and do or go and play with the money the way they played with the money that way?
Well, I don't think the
Bank of Ghana
because overdraft or liquidity support is a short term maturity date 12 months. So,
but could you, we have to say that for a capital bank, the board chair was Dr. Mensa Wotabil. He also was representing on the board the equity of one of the shareholders. That's ICGC.
Yes. Yes. So his church is also a shareholder.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then we also had ASEAN, who was also a member. And of course, the boss, the MD of the place, was also a member of the board, Fitzgerald Odonko. And then they had others. So that's what it means.
Yes.
Now, typically, let's say we had the banking crisis 2007, 2008.
Yeah.
It's even led to the improvement in Basel III protocols and all that, you know. And that is why we're here, liquidity support, making sure that the capitalization is strict, and then they have to do all those enforcement. In the US, some people went to jail. Some of them were members of boards, they were shareholders. Some, even who were the founders of those corporations, even committed suicide in the process. Now, in our parts of the world, if, let's say, we want to copy from best practices, what should be happening, knowing that we have a chair, members of a board, undertook a transaction that was illegal?
What is illegality? It has to be proven by a court of competent jurisdiction. So your allegation of illegality may not be the same by, you see, it has to be proven beyond reasonable doubt. So I think for the time being, let us take these things with a pinch of salt until, because the regulator, the Bank of Ghana, has assured us that investigations are ongoing, and if anybody is found culpable, Bank of Ghana itself is not a prosecuting authority. The prosecuting authorities are the Attorney General and Minister of Justice. They are the prosecuting authorities. So all they can do is they do their investigation. There is a suspicion about certain transactions. They pass on to the investigative body, either the CID or IOCO. Then the CID or IOCO will not also prosecute. They will send the docket to Attorney General. Then the Attorney General will decide. So I think we have to exercise a bit of patience. This then happened 14th of August 2017 last year. We are still
a year ago.
We are still inching towards the anniversary. A year, because in the case that you referred to in America, people were not prosecuted and jailed within a year.
You're saying it was not summary.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the prosecution started in a very short time, but the prosecution lasted a long time.
Yes. So
we haven't started a prosecution at all.
Maybe not. But if you are even invited to Yoko, you know, it's a first step. It's a first step. So, and it's been confirmed that some of them, including even staff of BOG, the Bank of Ghana, the governor has said that some of the staff have been invited to Yoko. But being invited there doesn't mean you are convicted until a court, you know, finds that.
Nana, there's something that really bothers me about this, and that is the Unibank situation. To put that thing in perspective, 5.3 billion cedis, 75% of the value of their assets, given out as loans to shareholders and related parties. In some cases, not even recorded as loans. So legally, I don't even know how it can be retrieved if it is not on your books as a loan. This money that we are now going to raise a bond to come and take care of, Nana, is this money gone for good? Has it evaporated? Or is there any chance of getting it back?
I think at this stage, I would say they haven't evaporated, because if any money was taken and used to acquire an asset and it can be traced, then that asset becomes the security that you can, you know, realize. So let's be patient and wait for the official report, which if it confirms that yes, this is the case, because I've seen on social media a whole list of properties that being alleged that Unibank, you know, some shareholder, you know, did. Well, at one of them I saw 477 million US dollars. I mean, $477 million, if you multiply by 4.8, you know, what do you get? And the total value of the bank is not even equivalent to that. So where is that? So I think patience is required. And as I said, what we need to do is to educate the public, especially the lay people out there, about the workings of the bank. And even some of them, if things happen and they feel that it is not the right thing, they should point out themselves. There's in your unofficial expose, you are saying that a loan defaulter, you know, paid money to one of the directors and all that. If you know that you have borrowed and you've defaulted, and somebody comes and said, you know, give me some for me to write off unofficially, you know that is wrong.
So what you're saying is that this money can be retrieved. This 5 points.
Once they can be traced, they can be retrieved.
But for example, this about 3-point-something billion of it was given out as loans without being recorded as loans. So in that case, if I, for example, am a shareholder or a related party, and I took, say, 1 billion of that money, and it wasn't recorded as a loan, how will you get it back from
So how did you know that 1 billion has been taken?
That's what the Bank of Ghana is telling us.
Yeah, so if they know that it hasn't been recorded, but they know that it's been taken, then the person will be made to pay. And that's why, you know...
But can you legally compel me if I've been given money by the bank?
You have to show where you got the money from.
From the bank?
I mean, yeah, if it's from the bank, then it means you owe the bank and you have to give it back.
But it wasn't recorded as a loan.
So by recorded as what?
I don't
Have
know.
you done work that for them and they are paying you? And if they are paying you, taxes will have to be deducted and all that. So I think let us...
Well, so we're continuing the conversation. I think that after we come back with the next line of streamed interview with Professor Bobkin, we'll ask as a roundup, what is in it all for depositors, for the ordinary members of the public? And should we always be having the confidence in the banks, especially the local banks? But Professor Bobkin is joining us live from the University of Ghana as is a teacher of finance, and that's good about the whole thing. But good morning to you, Professor Bobkin.
Hello, Prof. We appear to have a bit of a delay there, but we will catch up with Professor Bobkin in due course.
But I was asking you about the depositors. Should they be worried, even though the assurances have been coming in? But there are letters flying in of employees who have been giving termination letters after 2 months and all that. That seemed to be adding up to the frenzy and the trepidation.
Yeah. But I think we have to take some comfort in there that, yes, we have been told again by the governor that minimum level of jobs will be lost, because if you take the key management personnel such as MD or CEO, 5 banks have been put into one. So you cannot have 5 CEOs. It has to be one at that level, yes. But then if they're going to maintain all the branches, then one would expect that the staff, branch managers will all be there. So it's early days yet. Again, let's give them a bit of time. And that job is so huge, trying to combine 5 cultures into one. Because these banks, even those who are new, have been going for about a year. And there's a corporate culture that has been built there. Then all of a sudden, you've got a new bank which is going to combine all these 5 corporate cultures into a new culture. And so that is, to me, why the process has started, that let us, give the people the opportunity to prove themselves that, yes, they can fit into this new culture and they'll be taken on. So I'm praying that the barest minimum of job losses occasion, because if you get big job losses, that will not be happy. It won't make, especially the government, happy at all, because it's an area that is very dear to the heart of government, that jobs are created rather than lost. Yeah.
Speaking of government, Nana, so now as a result of all this, we have a new bank, Consolidated Bank. 100% government owned. 450 million Ghana cedis of our money has been used to capitalize this bank. I like the
emphasis on the million.
Yes. Has been used to capitalize this bank. Also, I am assuming, and I'm happy to be corrected, but if we are able to retrieve this...
we have to speak to Professor Bokpin.
Right, we have Professor Bokpin. In fact, perhaps I might put this question to him. Prof, good morning. I hope you can hear us. Thank you so much for your time.
Yes, good morning. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes. Now, Prof, we've been talking about all of this, and it's become clear that right now we have a new bank, a new Ghanaian bank, as a result of everything that has gone down. Consolidated Bank.
Yes.
Which has been capitalized with 450 million Ghana cedis. Also, if I am correct, if we are able to retrieve any of the money that we've lost in all of this scandal, for example, the 5.7 billion that Unibank gave out.
Billion cedis.
If we're able to retrieve that, that will also become an asset of Capital Bank. Am I correct?
Consolidated.
An asset of Consolidated Bank. Now, if that is the case, and it's a 100% government-owned bank, directors appointed by government, CEO appointed by government, everything done by government. Bearing in mind the track record of government in managing banks, should we be concerned about the future of Capital Bank? Is there anything at all, Consolidated Bank, is there anything at all that has changed in how we govern and manage state-owned enterprises that will ensure that Consolidated Bank will actually survive and thrive?
I think, thank you very much. That's an interesting question, and I believe that is a question that practically will be on the mind of every objective Ghanaian. What would government do differently from they have done in the time past, given the fact that the bank is 100% owned by Ghana? It's even been suggested that we are seeing another Ghana commercial bank in the making, given the development. But I believe that as a country, we should be able to learn from our own history and do the right things. When you look at what technically we call foreign banks or local banks or whatever, there's nothing really unique about foreign banks. If local banks will do the right thing, follow the corporate governance and internal control mechanisms, comply with the regulations and all of that, I mean, they will equally do well, just like the foreign banks. Because if you look at the foreign banks, supposedly, you would observe that the parent control, the parent company, exercise some level of supervision and control over those banks that these local or indigenous banks don't have the benefit of. But if we were also complying with the rules and regulations, and the central bank were to be doing its work right, then I don't see the reason why we can't do well as a country. But I believe that it's a question that we cannot just wish away. What would government be doing differently? How would the board be appointed, the composition of the board, the independence of the board in doing right banking? Because bank management is essentially risk management. And that is the issue. Even when it comes to the central bank, I mean, if you look at the composition of the board of the central bank, you look at the appointment process of the governance and all of that. Yes, you can talk about the fact that the central bank is independent, perhaps in theory, but its operational independence cannot be guaranteed under this kind of arrangement or framework. So going forward, the question is, what will be the corporate governance mechanisms that we will be putting in place? And I want to believe that it should be possible if, as a country, we believe that the government largely is inefficient in managing business, and this will not be in the best interest of the country, given that taxpayers' funds are being used. But of course, I also understand that this is not lost money. If you look at the arrangement, I mean, it is possible to recover quite a large sum of money that perhaps seem to have been lost through related party transactions, off-balance sheet transactions, and all of that. So then we can decide that, of course, let's sell off our interest to the Ghana Stock Exchange and invite individuals or private investors to invest in it rather than being 100% owner. So that question can be answered, that position can be taken at any point in time. I want to believe that in the circumstance, in the immediate, the central bank and perhaps together with Ghana government have decided that this is the best way to restructure these distressed banks or failed banks. Technically, these banks had failed. And this is the way to go about it in terms of also preserving jobs, in terms of also preserving local content in the banking industry and all of that. So in that case, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt.
I don't know about you, but when I hear of a suggestion to give government benefit of the doubt, I get concerned. I know that this government plans to divest the ownership of this bank over a period of time. I don't recall the period that they set, but over some time they are planning to divest the ownership. They are hoping to sell it to Ghanaian owners, within 2 years. Yeah, within 2 years, that's right. But that still means 2 years, including an election year, during which the government has control of a bank, a massive bank. In terms of deciding which projects to lend to, which money to take out of this bank for projects and, make their own decisions about when to pay back and so forth. What would your recommendations be if you were to suggest specific measures to prevent government from abusing the ownership of this bank in the 2 years?
I think that it's a very good question, and I think that it has to come with a clear timeline that and much transparency and disclosure in all of these things. But you see, if we had a central bank that was doing its work very, very well, I mean, independent of influence from the seat of government and all of that, I mean, there will be greater information flow for which the public can take a decision and react to. It should be possible. But you see, we found ourselves in a country where the government seems to be claiming to be independent, but at the end of the day, the mode of appointment and the yardstick, the basis, the channel, and all of that do not really suggest that we want to really guarantee private sector leadership in terms of our economic drive. These are issues, but I want to believe that it can be resolved. We should be able to learn from our past, and government will have to come out with a clear timeline of how these things will be done, and then the necessary disclosure and the transparency, the necessary governance mechanisms will have to be put in place and complied with. But of course, you can have all these things, and yet it will not be complied with. If you look at the report from the central bank from 2014, 2015, 2016, I mean, they knew largely what was going on. I mean, I would have been surprised if the central bank didn't know or was totally ignorant of the things going on within these banks and among these banks. I would have been surprised. That would have meant that we are not safe, and our deposits are not safe in the banking industry. But I take consolation in the fact that they knew largely, and I believe that the central bank would have to apologize at some point in time, because I believe they were complicit to some extent in how these things have evolved. Of course, when it comes to financial crisis or bank crisis, they may just be the fallout or the unavoidable consequences of capitalism or liberalization that we embraced at some point in time in our history. But of course, that is why we have regulation. And that is why regulation, both in its proactiveness and reactiveness, must be quite strong, and it must be done without fear or favor.
Well, so we have to leave you. But before I do so, let me just quotes the former governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Governor Sanusi, during the banking crisis in Nigeria. And he says there was a chance to make millions and people seized it for the private sector. Then for the regulators, they failed the people. Now, we're parading the so-called greedy private shareholders and investors, etc., in public, giving confidence to the people that we're holding them in check. But publicly, we're not seeing the action, even though the Bank of Ghana says it's so-called trying to put in place measures for its officials and try to, whether they'll prosecute them or punish them, whatever it is. What should the central bank be doing to also restore that confidence?
I think, yeah, the reputation of the central bank is at stake. But I find hope in the fact that even when confidence is wounded in the sector, I find hope in the fact that in the last 1.5 years or so, we have seen the central bank actually doing the right things. Perhaps the incentive to do so is stronger on their part in terms of the leadership of the central bank in trying to clean up the system, in trying to resolve the issue. I think that beyond this, it has to be thorough. But of course, we cannot say that those people who have been mentioned are found guilty. I mean, it has to follow a due process. And I want to believe that the central bank has a very strong legal department. I also know largely that the second deputy governor of Bank of Ghana is also a lawyer who has also worked with the IMF to the highest level. And therefore, in terms of due processes, in terms of thoroughness and all of that, they would have done all of this. And then we give them the benefit of the doubt. I'm saying this because we have seen the central bank actually doing something that we haven't seen in the last couple of years. And that is why we have found ourselves in this situation. And therefore, we encourage them that they do this thoroughly in a more holistic manner and clean up the system. And that is where I find comfort. That is where I think that the banking sector will not be the same after the central bank has finished its work in terms of the cleanup and the necessary support they are getting from the Ministry of Finance and the government at the end of the day. It will not be the same. But of course, that is not to suggest that this will be the last crisis that we will see. Oftentimes, the next crisis starts when the last one ended. Because when it comes to any system with human interventions and all of that, there will always be ways to offset the regulatory burden. There will always be ways to make money that perhaps may not be consistent with the rules and all of that. And that is why monitoring is key. Of all the things that God created, it has always been man that has tried to be something else from the original plan.
Well,
and
thank you very much.
Monitor. God himself monitors us 24/7.
Well, thank you very much. And thanks for telling us that, well, another crisis has already started. Whilst we're trying to end the last one. I know. We've been speaking to the head of finance, University of Ghana Business School, the head of the Department of Finance, Professor Godfred Bobkin, as we call him. Thanks for joining us this morning, but we have to come back to the studio. Wrap up really.
And
the depositors and all the things.
Let's look into the future. And of course, we've learned a lot from Professor Bokpin. But in my head now, I'm thinking of my own bank. And I'm wondering...
You own a bank?
No, I mean the bank, my own bank, where I see...
Well, no, we're just told that a new has started.
Crisis has started.
So maybe if you're starting one, you're new one, then we...
I mean my own bank where I see.
I know.
And I'm thinking, look, I don't think anyone who was a customer at Unibank saw it coming, or Capital Bank, or UT Bank, or any of the 7 banks saw this coming. So if I'm concerned, and look, if it was happening there, I can't think of any reason why it can't be happening in some other banks too, just that they haven't been discovered yet. So what questions should I be asking at my bank to make sure that I am not involved in an organization that is looting my deposits and putting me at risk?
By and large, it's very difficult to give some cast iron, rules. But The main thing is our trust in the regulator, because by and large, they are looking after our interest. And so if the regulator is now giving us an assurance upon assurance that let's forget about whatever has happened, and now we've turned over a new leaf, we're going to make sure that there will be no regulatory forbearance, and we will apply the rule to the letter of the law, then that should be reassuring. But as human institution, by all means, there may be some frailties. You know, other than that, we will not be human. And that's what probably is leading to Godfred saying that as one crisis ends, another is starting. But let's take an optimistic view that, yes, there's a silver lining in the cloud, and if these happenings have been identified as 60–70% attributable to the absence of good corporate governance, and now some are being put in place, then we should support that effort and hope that the regulator will, as they have pledged over and over again, take our interests at heart and ensure that the right things are done, and that we can put the trust in the banks, because after all, it's a better alternative than to put our money, in the ground, as a lady recently found out. Yes.
Well, thank you very much. We've had Nana Utui Champong, an experienced banker and lecturer, but has given us great advice. Has been doing that on Joy FM, JoyNews, and throughout the rest of the multimedia platforms. But Kojo, we have to end.
Yes, we do, and I thought I'd read perhaps one or two of your messages. You've been watching and paying attention. Honorable Society in WA Central says, some of our bankers and our politicians are worse than the masked armed robbers on our streets, but our national security and law enforcers look on unconcerned. If care is not taken, some people will devise their own means of handling such people very soon. I sincerely hope it doesn't come to that. Care must be taken. But thank you, Nana Utua Champong, for making the time to be with us. We've got so much more coming up. Coming up next, Greater Accra Regional Branch Executives of the opposition, NDC, have backed the candidature of former Trade and Industry Minister Ekospio Gabra to lead the party in 2020's general elections. Of course,